Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. And I know it's a beautiful day, and it's very tempting to be home gardening and raking leaves and doing all that wonderful things outside. But this is a very, very important issue that is facing the state of Michigan, actually the whole country, is our road funding and what's going on with the condition of our roads. So our organization decided to have a public forum so we can just get all the good facts, the real facts about what is going on with this proposal and how it will impact the state of Michigan. I'm Pam Burns. I am the chair of the Western Washtenaw Dems for programs, I should say vice chair for programs. And with us we have the panelists, Representative Adam Zemke from the Ann Arbor area, and Roy Townsend, who's the managing director of the Washtenaw County Road Commission. And also in the audience, we have Barb Fuller, who's the Washtenaw County Road Commissioner, and Representative Gretchen Driscoll, the representative from the 52nd District. And Brian Marl, the mayor of Saline. Any other elected officials? And Diane Hockett from the Washtenaw Intermediate School District. And then also we have Matt Kapp here, who is government relations specialist for the Michigan Farm Bureau. And I think it's very important to have the input from the Farm Bureau on the impact of this proposal on the agricultural community. And then last but not least, we have Scott Menzel, who is the superintendent of the Washtenaw Intermediate School District. And he will also address what the issues are regarding education and how it's impacted on this proposal. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Adam, and I believe he has a PowerPoint presentation, and we'll go from there. So thank you all, and we'll look forward to questions at the end. We have some index cards that we'll pass out if we haven't already, and if you want to have questions on that, then just pass them out, and then we'll do them in a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I apologize for my tardiness. It's been a very active day in Lansing right now. We have the budget going on, and I sit on the Appropriations Committee, and so we are quite busy. But we're here to talk about something that's really important, and it's an issue that you've all heard about by now. I'm sure you have heard something about Proposal 1. It's a public safety issue. It's an issue that concerns all of us because of our educational system and the way our tax structure is set up, quite frankly. And that's why all these things tie together. Everybody, I've heard this phrase that this proposal is loaded up like a Christmas tree. It's got all sorts of different lights. The reason it has all sorts of different lights is because of the asks that our voters have been saying to us for as long as I've been in the legislature. It hasn't been that awfully long, but I can tell you that I bet Representative Burns will tell you the same thing. She said it on the Transportation Committee. People want the monies from their car registrations to go to road repair. They want gas taxes to go to road repair. They want the money that is logically associated with infrastructure taxation to go to fix our infrastructure network. That seems logical, and it seems like a totally justifiable request. In order to do that, you have to do something like Proposal 1. And so that's what we're here to talk about, why that is. So I'll frame this for you just briefly, because I think that driving down the roads on your way here, you could probably understand why we need to do something about our crumbling infrastructure. But 27% of our bridges across the state of Michigan are in need of repair. They're crumbling, they're falling apart. In our largest municipalities, our most populated areas, especially in southeastern Michigan, 48% of our roads are in poor or mediocre condition. Those are technical definitions. Those are not just bad condition. That's a technical definition for how bad they are. When you look at it from driving down the road, you can look at it from a variety of different fashions. You can think of yourself as, well, I've spent so much money in car repair, and that's why we need to fix the roads. But some people, they look at it based on the fact of everything that's associated with getting in an accident. So there's a huge amount of economic impact with getting into an accident. Your medical costs, productivity costs, workplace losses, travel delays, insurance costs, and legal costs. Across the state of Michigan, this has an $8.1 billion economic impact. And those are not positive things for consumers. Those are negative things. So what this amounts to is about $357 per driver. When you look at the roadway conditions, this is a fact that I think that it's worth drawing attention to. They're significant, again, significant as a technical term here, significant factor in 1/3 of traffic fatalities. So we're not talking about just accidents, fender benders, we're talking about people dying. And that alone, that last factor, should be alarming to folks. So how did we get here? There is enough blame to go around for Michigan's poor road conditions to everyone. We have brutal winters, the fact that we have a vicious freeze-thaw cycle. We don't do a good job with repair, and it's not Roy's fault that we don't do a good job with repair. It really isn't. We don't do a good job with repair because of this last item, lack of investment. We don't have the amount of money to invest in the best decisions. So we're literally patching, in some cases, literally or figuratively, everywhere. We can't do the things that Roy will tell you that we need to do because we don't have enough money. And we have an economic investment in the fact that we have the highest truck commercial vehicle weights of any state in the nation. Now, is that alone causing the problem? No, it's not. But it is a contributing factor. So, how did we get here? This is very hard to see, so I'm going to read you these numbers from left to right. On the far left, we have Minnesota. They invest per person $315 per year. Just to the right of them, Illinois at $235 per year. Then Ohio at $235 per year. Then Wisconsin at $231 per year. Indiana at $187, and our beautiful mitten here at $174. $315 in Minnesota. Climate's not that different there, folks. $174 in Michigan. This gives you an idea as to status quo. We continue to invest the same amount of revenue that we've been investing for many years. Important thing to take from this slide, this is just a downward trend. On our nationwide infrastructure, our statewide trunk line system, regional and local roads, they're just going to continue to degrade. This problem is not going to get better without a new revenue investment. So the cost of doing nothing is back to increasingly dangerous road conditions and massive long-term reconstruction costs. It's not a linear thing where you just, $1 now is going to be $1 10 years from now. It's going to be $10 10 years from now. So, or Proposal 1. That's what we have before us. Very basic synopsis. Fixes Michigan's crumbling roads, protects our schools and local government from having a negative fiscal impact, and it provides tax relief to offset the additional costs to low-income families, low-income working families. Working.
Yes. What about retirees who have no earning income?
We'll go into that here. Passing Proposal 1, $1.3 billion for transportation costs, $300 million for schools, and $94 million for local governments. That's the total amount of revenue we're talking about here. The impact. The black is what we can do with our current investments. Just nearly 1,100 miles of reconstruction, nearly 3,000 miles of rehabilitation. The yellow goes with the additional revenue that Proposal 1 allows us. 2,200 miles of reconstruction, 6,600 miles of rehabilitation. Pretty significant. So why is it so complicated? Number one thing, ballot language on this is terrible. I'll be the first to tell you that, although I'm not the first, I'm sure. The real reason is because the current law is very complicated. And we continue to hear from residents, give us a simple way of understanding where our revenues are being spent. Make sure they're protected. Make sure that when we're driving down the road, we know that that tax that we paid on that gas and that vehicle registration, that's going to fix those roads. So we did that. That's what Proposal 1 does. But in order to do that, you have to understand why is the current system complicated. So in essence, you have two streams of revenue when you go and fill your car up. You've got a fuel tax, it's flat, 19 cents per gallon of gas, 15 cents per gallon of diesel. And then you got a sales tax on that fuel, 6%. That's your indexing portion. So if you were to just take a look at this revenue, you'd say, well, that seems like a lot, right? You got two streams of revenue, one's indexing. Why do we have a problem? Because that second part, the one that's indexing, most of that doesn't go to infrastructure. 75% of it goes to schools, 10% to local governments, 15% to roads. So when you look back, you still got that flat tax. You don't have much of that sales tax and gas going into infrastructure repair. That's where the problem lies. So what we seek to do with Proposal 1 is rededicate all that revenue, put it all, because it is infrastructure, it's taxation on driving down the roads. We lump that in with some registration changes, and we dedicate all that money to roads. It goes to the transportation fund, which is constitutionally protected. Then we end up with some buckets left, right? I don't think anybody here, including myself, wants to take away 75% of this sales tax from our local schools, or 10% from our local governments. That's $1.3 billion total. That's very large money. So we have to figure out a way to refill those areas. If we want to dedicate all of this revenue, plus registration costs, to infrastructure, then we need to refill those pots. So, summary, fuel tax being flat, costs have risen and vehicles have become more efficient, so you have decreasing revenues. Current law, sales tax structure on fuel rises with inflation, but dedicates very little revenue to road maintenance and repair. That's what we talked about. So why not just raise the fuel tax? The legislature had a proposal before us to raise the fuel tax. It would have brought it up significantly, would have generated about the same amount of revenue. Two things. One, it would not have dedicated all of your infrastructure-based taxation to road repair or to the transportation fund. We still would have had those two pie charts that we just saw. We continue to hear from people that they didn't want that. And the second thing is that there weren't enough representatives that are willing to support this. This passed through the Senate with, I think, 21 or 22 votes in favor. You need 20. It did not have 56 votes in the House. So we could not get it done. So we went back to the drawing board, tried to meet what the demand from residents were, and tried to meet the revenue targets that we knew we had to hit. Proposal 1 is what came out of it. So how does it work? So we talked about those two pie charts before. Fuel tax, and the best way to think of this is really a combination of what you saw in those two pie charts. That's created new. You have a different way of taxation of fuel. You have it in the wholesale stream, and you have some changes to those internal taxes. In addition to that, you have a registration component change. So right now, on new cars, you have a depreciation for 4 years. Who here has bought a new car in the last 10 years? I've never purchased a new car. On new cars, they depreciate for 4 years. So if you purchase a new $30,000 Jeep right now, you pay $155 in annual registration fee. For the next 4 years, that's going to decrease to $111, and it's going to flatten out. And you don't get any more depreciation values or depreciation decreases in your registration costs after that. This eliminates that. So I'll be honest with you, that is effectively an increase, right? That's fair to say. So that brings in some more revenue. In addition, you have some changes in the way electric vehicles are registered. And there's an additional cost of $25 annually for new electric and hybrid vehicles. So part of that really comes into play, and also we'll take a look at what those do here. Part of that comes largely into play in the commercial vehicle sector. One thing a lot of folks don't realize is that there's pretty significant development in the area of hybrid and electric commercial vehicles. It's a big business. Actually, Eaton Corporation on the west side of the state has a big portion of the market on it. I know this because I'm an engineer and I used to work with Eaton. And what we don't want to do is have commercial vehicles that are not paying their fair share. When you look at weight versus degradation of roads, heavier weight vehicles degrade roads further. That is just a simple fact. And so what you don't want to do is, if you get more fuel efficient heavyweight vehicles, to have them not pay their fair share. That's why the electric vehicle component on the registrations was separated. And that's why, in conjunction with that, you have a much larger commercial vehicle increase in their registration costs. You have it on traditional commercial vehicles, and you have it on hybrid and electric commercial vehicles. So as the development on those continues. We obviously don't want to have to revisit this again in 2 or 3 years as technology changes. We want to do it once. So this is the solution that we came up with. Other thing, and I cannot stress this enough because it is the #1 thing we hear from constituents on. The legislature cannot touch these funds for anything other than transportation. They are constitutionally protected. It is the most secure that you could ever get. So they go to transportation, the transportation fund. There's an allocation, and I think Roy will probably talk a little bit more about the percentages of what goes to MDOT, what goes to county road commissions, what goes to cities. There's a formula. It's called the Act 51 formula, Act 51 of 1951. The next question I always get, well, the legislature could just change that law and screw us then. It's true, technically, but it's called Act 51 of 1951 for a reason. It hasn't been changed since 1951. So the likelihood the legislature is just going to come back and revisit this right now is pretty low. Plus, it seems to be somewhat effective. It has a few flaws, but it works pretty good. So we've got $1.3 billion in new revenue for our transportation fund. That's where we're at right now. We've got to fill those pots back up. So that's what the additional sales tax does. That's what your 1% is really going to. It's going to go refill those pots. And because most states, I don't think any states, in fact, have 0.5% sales tax increases or 0.25%, we did a 1%, was the minimum, basically. We did that, and it generates a little bit more than what was in there in the existing pots. School aid fund, again, constitutionally protected, goes from $1 billion to $1.3 billion in revenue. Local government funding goes up by $94 million. And to offset the additional tax burden on the working poor, you have the earned income tax credit. A little bit of background in the earned income tax credit. It was originally instituted on the federal level in the 90s under the Clinton welfare reform package. It's been highly effective at fighting poverty. And it used to be at 20% in Michigan, which was great. We're not talking about big bucks here. We're talking about a few $100s for some people who don't make much money. That decreased under the Republican tax shift in 2011. It totally changed. So it decreased by 14%. Claimants could only claim 6%. So we negotiated a deal to reinstate the EITC to 20%. What that means is, according to the nonpartisan House Fiscal Agency, which is about as unbiased as we can get, the taxation change per household is $195 on average across the state. With the EITC increase to 20%, you generate $333 per household. So your simple math shows you it's $138 per household in a positive direction. So a gas tax shift, if we wanted to do that, is inherently a regressive tax structure. A lot of complaints about that. So is a sales tax. Same thing. We did what we could to offset that for the people who we thought really needed it the most. And so it's not perfect, but it helps significantly. And in summary, when you go to the ballot box on May 5th, because I'm obviously here with a one-sided view on this, if you haven't figured that out already, Proposal 1 generates $1.3 million more in revenue for the transportation fund. Backfills 100% of the school aid fund that we're taking from and generates $300 million more. Backfills 100% of our funding for local governments and adds 94 million more. And it raises the EITC back up to that 20%. So when you ask yourself 3 simple questions. Do I want to dedicate all the money I pay when I'm driving down the road in that car or truck or whatever? Do I want to dedicate that all to the transportation fund? Do I believe that local schools need more money? Do I believe that local governments need more money? And am I tired of legislators getting general fund dollars that they can shift around and don't go where I want them to? If the answer to all those questions is yes, which it is for me, you should vote yes on Proposal 1. That's it. It's constitutionally protected additional revenue streams to areas that I value a lot: education, support of local communities, and transportation. So that's what I'm here to talk about.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. These guys are in the dark. Is that? Unless you want to come forward, would you prefer to sit there?
I think Barb's gonna get the
Okay,
light.
yeah, I just noticed that you guys are in the dark, and we don't want you in the dark. Thank you, Adam. Next, we're going to move on to Roy Townsend. As I mentioned, he's a managing director of the Washtenaw County Road Commission, and when I was a road commissioner, I had the opportunity of working with Roy, and I know he knows the stuff inside and out, and is a very dedicated public employee. Roy Townsend.
All right, thank you, Pam. Yeah, I've been at the Road Commission over 25 years, so I've been living this for a long time. First, I'm gonna go a little bit about needs, also talk about what it does mean for Washtenaw County in general, and then also Washtenaw County Road Commission. Is this turned on? Yes, okay. First, as far as the needs, I'll bring on that. There we go. As far as the needs, in Washtenaw County, Adam had a map showing the condition of the roads as far as poor and bridges. In Washtenaw County, about 45% of our roads are in poor condition as far as road commission. And here again, you know, you can say, oh, it's all our fault. End of the day, it ends up being funding. Same with our bridges. About 1/3 of our bridges are structurally deficient. That doesn't mean they're going to fall in tomorrow, but we do have 4 bridges that are closed or culverts that are closed. Just last fall, we had a combine fall through one in Saline Township. You know, not a good situation. We had another one closed on Willow Road last fall. You know, we weren't expecting it, went out and did an inspection, had to close it. It's going to be closed for about 6 to 9 months. That means that road is effectively non-serviceable, and when emergency services have to get across, they can't. So we're doing everything to get those roads back open. But that's not an ideal way to be looking at transportation. Wait until you have to close things and then replace them. Ideally, we knew those bridges and culverts are in poor condition. And you know, we plan and try to do, but it comes down to funding. For example, we receive money per Act 51, like Adam was talking about, and how the split works is 39% goes to MDOT, 39% go to the counties, all 83 counties, and then it's divided up based on, you know, population, rural miles, urban miles. So obviously Oakland's going to get the most. We're about the 6th largest road commission, so we're going to get the 6th most compared to Lenawee or Monroe and so on. And then the cities are going to get 22%. Our revenue in 2004 was about $17.6 million that we got in MTF revenue. That was the peak. And if you owned a trailer, that was when they did the trailer tax. It was a one-time thing where if you had a trailer, it was going to be $75 or more. And then as long as you kept that trailer, you didn't have to register it again. So our revenue went up. We knew back in 2000, we knew longer than that, but in 2003, it was like, okay, there need to be more money in the roads. Well, they came up with this, and there's a little bit of a solution, raise a little bit of revenue for everyone. But at the end of the day, it stopped, the revenue dropped off. And what also started happening is people started driving less. And the whole formula, the whole premise of tax, which is 19 cents per gallon, is people always were driving more, buying, you know, cars that weren't getting fuel efficient cars, the big SUVs and the trucks and all that stuff. So people are buying more and more fuel. In 2004, people started driving less, and then kicked in, cars are becoming more fuel efficient. So the revenue, it started dropping off, and went down to about $16 million. And now here we are, 2015, we're finally back to that $17 million. So it's like, we're excited that we're finally back to with the same revenue we had in 2004. But it's like if I went down to the Varsity Ford and said, hey, I'd like to buy one of those new F-150s at the 2004 prices, I don't think they're gonna sell it to us. So everything, we're paying 2015 prices on a budget 2004 revenue. So price of salt, the price of steel, the price of trucks, the price of everything has gone up. And that's why we're just not keeping up. Just from, we have a little chart I didn't hand out, but if you, based on inflation, our revenue right now should be about $22 million. We're at 17. You think, okay, that's only $4 million. But if you go chart that from 2004 to 2014, the chart goes up and the revenue stays flat, it goes down. The difference between those two is about $30 million. That's $30 million we have not invested just in Washtenaw County roads, and that's just to keep up with inflation. So that's over $3 million a year that we're not putting in the road system, and you drive around and you can see it. So, and that was just to keep up with inflation. In 1997, I was at the Road Commission, and at that point, Governor Engler went around with, WJR who's our big Paul W. Smith or J.P. McCarthy. Went around, and the bridges were crumbling, pieces of concrete. And at that point, we said, yeah, they need a 10-cent a gallon increase in gas tax. And everyone's like, yeah, that's what we really need. End of the day, the legislature agreed to a 4-cent a gallon gas tax. And of that, 4 cents went to roads, 1 cent went to bridges. So we were looking for 10, we sort of got 3 cents. Obviously, there was a need for bridges because the bridges were crumbling. They still are. And so that was, we knew back then, it was a little stopgap. So and at that same time in 97, they said, the next year, in 98, we're going to do what we call diesel parity, which, because the diesel tax hadn't changed since 84. When 98 came, 2000. Here we are in 2015. The diesel tax still has not changed since 1984. 31 years it's been set at 15 cents a gallon. So it's one of those things. And so those are the challenges we face every day. And you talk about, I go to a lot of these and people, the roads are always better in Ohio. We have, their gas tax is 50% more. Ours is 19 cents, theirs is 28 cents. So it's 9 cents. People say, what's 9 cents? Well, it's 50%. 50% on billions of dollars means they're spending $1 billion every year more on their road infrastructure. And it's not just like 1 year, they've been doing it for decades. So if we were spending $1 billion more in this state, Washtenaw County Road Commission would be getting about $10 million more each year. So that's what we needed back then in 97, and that's what we still need today, or actually more than that today. So you can see, we're just not keeping up, and we haven't been for decades. We've always been probably 45 to 48 as far as money put into roads and infrastructure in this state. And obviously now we're at 50 as far as money spent per capita. So it's one of those challenges we see. I have this chart, Barbara, did you hand this out? And I won't go over the front side, which is, Adam sort of covered how it's going to all work. But the back side is sort of explanation, what does it mean for Washtenaw County Road Commission and all the cities and villages in Washtenaw County? Right now, in 2014, it shows that we're receiving about $17.5 million in revenue. In 2016, when the tax would be in place, we'd receive about another $4 million up to 21. Year 2, $25 million, and in year 18 and beyond, it'd be 29. So it'd be $12 million more a year, and you would see the results. For example, just last fall, the County Board of Commissioners passed 1 year Public Act 283, $500,000. It raised about $7 million countywide. Of that, $4 million went to the roads. With that, we're doing about 75 miles of road improvements with that millage. And then we partner that with federal funds and other money, and we're ended up close to 90 miles of road improvements countywide. So it's something you're going to be able to see. So in 16, if we had that $4 million, $8 million in 17, and $12 million in 18, you're going to see 100 miles of roads improve each year. The other thing, those are the paved roads. We have 80 miles of what we call gravel primary roads in this county. Right now, we've been budgeting to do 1 mile each year. So in 80 years, if we can wait 80 years, we're finally going to get around to all the gravel primary roads. We also have another about 650 gravel local roads that we're depending on the townships that participate. So the needs are just enormous in Washtenaw County like they are in any of the counties. And people say, well, aren't the roads better in another county? It's like, you go to Jackson, you go to Lenawee, you go to Oakland, you go to, wherever, Sheboygan, we're all in the same situation because road commissions have no ability to raise revenue. We depend on the state legislature to take action to raise revenue. We have no taxing authority. This is the first time when the county board did that as a one-time thing. They've done it, they did it like in the 70s, but this is the first time in about 40 years they've done something. End of the day, I think this is the first real transportation funding increase this state's seen in probably 50 years. Like I said, they did something in 97, which we knew should have been 10 cents. It was 4 cents. They never have dealt with the diesel since 84. So I think, you know, and the thing is, us engineers realize if you spend money now, like in a seal coat, that's where we put the tar down, the stones, that's about $25,000 a mile. And we can save a road and keep it in sort of like sealing your deck. You can keep it, extend the life of that pavement. If you let the pavement go, let's say Scioto Church Road, Wagner into the city, I think if anyone drives, it's probably one of the worst roads in the county. That's gonna cost over $300,000 a mile to repair. That's 12 times the cost. So if we would just kept up on seal coating that road and taking care of it, we could do it at 1/12 the cost. That's why, and if you can do it now, do the preventive maintenance, it's so much cheaper to keep ahead of the system. So, end of the day, I mean, that's why we're a big proponent of the Road Commission, because like I said, this is the first time I think we've looked at it. Is it complicated? Yes. I mean, when we first came out, it's like, took me a while to go through all the bills to find out how it all attaches together. But it's a complicated situation we're in now, and I think this is the first time they've actually took the sales tax off of gas, and finally, when you fill up your tank, that money's finally gonna go to roads. And it's dedicated to transportation, which is a first too, so keep that money in transportation. So I'll be around, answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Roy. And next, I'd like to turn the panel over to Matt Kapp, who is from Washtenaw County. His family's from Northfield Township and graduated from Whitmore Lake High School, and we're happy to have him back. He's representing the Michigan Farm Bureau.
Thank you, Pam. It's an honor to be back in Washtenaw County. My family has farmed in Washtenaw County since the middle 1800s. As Pam said, the Northfield Township and Ann Arbor Township area, my family has farmed there forever. My dad still has a farm on Nixon Road. In fact, some of you might know where it is because if you're driving north on Nixon, it says Kapp 1931 on the roof. Several of you probably know where that barn is. That's my dad's farm. I'm with Michigan Farm Bureau, and Michigan Farm Bureau is an organization that represents farmers. We have over 48,000 Farm Bureau member families across the state of Michigan. And I work for those members. Those members are my employers. And I should point out that one of my employers is here tonight. Steve Thalen, the president of the Washtenaw County Farm Bureau, is sitting in the back of the room. Farmers like Steve is who I work for. I represent them on policy issues such as Prop 1. So I want to talk a little bit about Michigan agriculture. Michigan agriculture is big business. Michigan agriculture contributes over $100 billion to the state's economy, and we are the second most diverse agricultural state in the country, only behind California. We raise commodities from corn, soybeans, wheat, livestock, fruits and vegetables, you name it, outside of a few additional ones that California can grow, we grow it in the state of Michigan. So why would farmers care about roads? I guess that's a fair question. I saw my brother-in-law on Easter Sunday, and he's not from a farming background. He asked me what I was working on these days. And I said, I'm working on Proposal 1. And he said, well, isn't that the road funding bill? And I said, yes. And he says, why would a farm organization be working on Proposal 1? I don't understand why farmers would be so concerned about roads. Okay, that's a fair question. Farmers use the roads every day. You need to drive a tractor to plant a crop. You need to drive the tractor again in the field to take care of the crop after it's planted. You need to go back into the field once again to harvest the crop. And then once you harvest the crop, then you take it to where it's stored, if it's not processed right away. Then it gets processed, and then eventually it gets sold. Agriculture is using our transportation infrastructure to produce a crop, to process a crop, and to sell a crop. And bad roads impact my members' businesses. My members have utilized expensive equipment. Combines and corn planters is high dollar equipment. And potholes, bad roads damage corn planters, damage combines, damage tractors. I got members that will drive, they're telling me they're driving 5 miles out of the way to get to their fields to avoid a bad stretch of roads because they're concerned about the equipment damage. And the other impact that we need to think about is damage to the product. Fruit farmers, so I'm talking apples and cherries. Selling an apple as an apple is a lot more valuable to my members than apples being turned into applesauce and being turned into an apple pie. We use bruised apples for when we make apple pie and applesauce. Well, a bin of apples that you would buy at the farmer's market as an apple, a bin of those type of apples is sold $400 a bin. $400 a bin. Do you know how much a bin of bruised apples is sold for? $100. We're talking a difference of $300 that my members are losing per bin because of the condition of Michigan roads. That's a significant impact to my members. So my members want better roads in Michigan. My members use roads every day in their business activities. So what's Michigan Farm Bureau's position on Proposal 1? When Michigan Farm Bureau determines what we're for and against, we look in our policy book, and the legislators and former legislators in the room are probably familiar with the Michigan Farm Bureau policy book. Our members write our policy book during our state annual meeting. So my members tell me what I'm for and against. And I look at that book when I determine what side of an issue I'm gonna go on. So on Prop 1, we got a couple policy statements that lead us to support Proposal 1. The first one that I want to talk about, and Representative Zemke mentioned this, Proposal 1 redirects all the tax revenue collected at the pump to go to roads. Michigan Farm Bureau supports that concept. Michigan Farm Bureau supports the concept of user fees. If all the money collected at the pump is going to roads, that's a user fee, because if I drive 400 miles a week and Scott drives 100 miles a week, I'm going to be paying more taxes to the roads, but I probably should be because I'm using the roads more than Scott. Michigan Farm Bureau supports the concept of user fees. Now, if we redirect all the money at the pump to go to roads, as Representative Zemke indicated, that creates a problem somewhere else in the budget. That creates a problem with funding of schools and local governments. So I also have a statement in my Michigan Farm Bureau policy book that says Michigan Farm Bureau supports a 1% increase in the sales tax to offset the loss of revenue that schools and local governments would receive by redirecting all the money collected at the pump. Proposal 1 does that. I also have policy statements in my policy book that support competitive bidding, that support road warranties. Proposal 1 gives us taxpayers some extra protection with warranties and competitive bidding. So because of those statements, Michigan Farm Bureau supports Proposal 1. We're a member of the Safe Roads Yes Coalition, which is the coalition that's campaigning for a yes vote on Proposal 1. An additional $1.3 billion annually to our roads is going to go a long way to get our roads up to the condition that they need to be. So we're a yes vote. I would encourage all of you to vote yes on Proposal 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And then next we have Scott Menzel, who I first met when I was a state representative. He was the superintendent of Northfield School District, Whitmore Lake Schools, and now he is the superintendent of Washtenaw Intermediate School District, and we're very happy to have him with us. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Pam. So if Adam didn't convince you, and Roy didn't convince you, and Matt didn't convince you, my job is to kind of bring it home. So if you're teetering on the fence, really it's to talk about what are the implications of Proposal 1 for public education. And you've heard some of the specifics outlined by prior presenters, but I'll point out a few things. One, safety is an issue for schools. If you think about it, our buses are driving a lot of miles every day. There's a wear and tear cost on our buses, and there's a safety issue for every student who's transported on the buses. And in the condition that our roads are currently in, that's a major challenge. Secondly, I don't know how many of you have teenage drivers, but I have one with a license and one that will have one this summer. Now, I'm absolutely terrified of what will happen for my teenage daughters if they hit one of those mammoth potholes, because they're not seasoned or veteran drivers. And quite frankly, as much as I'd like to think my daughters will never be engaged in distracted driving, it only takes one split second of a poor decision to create a catastrophe. So we're concerned about the safety of our students on our buses, as well as those that drive to school. So that's the first piece. Secondly, and in some respects, this is the crux of the issue. There's a certain amount of stability and funding for schools that has been an issue subsequent to Proposal A. So how many of you were around, remember the Proposal A change in how we fund our schools? There were some really good things about shifting from the heavy property tax burden that people had to a more, what we thought was going to be reliable, sustainable source of funding. Problem is that part of the Proposal A promise didn't materialize as soon as the economy moved in the wrong direction. The other part of Proposal A that was a shock to a lot of people that we discovered roughly around 2007 is that we thought mistakenly that school aid funding was for schools, K-12 schools in particular. And what we learned is that constitutionally that's not the case. And so the governor, at the time it was Governor Granholm, in some severe economic situation, borrowed $200 million or so from the school aid fund to support higher education. We were concerned about the borrowing, notwithstanding the pledge to pay it back. Once you open that floodgate, it's difficult to close the door. So we're in a position where, subsequent to that, K-12 school aid appropriation has continued to be used to support not only K-12 education, but also community colleges and higher education. And the Constitution permits it. This proposal will close part of that loophole. Not the whole loophole, but a part of it. So if Proposal 1 passes, school aid funding cannot be used to fund higher education, with the exception of community colleges and public career and technical education programs. So what that means, bottom line for our K-12 schools, means that we can't say how the $300 million in additional revenue will be spent. We still have to trust our elected officials to appropriate money in a way that makes sense. And I'm going to withhold commentary. Actually, Adam is fantastic as a representative for our area on the K-12 Appropriations Committee, and he fights hard to ensure that the funding gets to schools where it belongs. And he recognizes that this is not just a K-12 system, it's a prenatal through post-secondary system, but we have to think through how we manage those investments. So to have a constitutional protection, even though it may not go as far as we would like, it does close the loophole so that the $200 to $300 million that's currently shifted to universities won't happen any longer. And I'm all for funding our universities. I think, unfortunately, our state doesn't invest enough in infrastructure. Infrastructure physically, which would be our roads, and infrastructure in terms of human capital, and that's our education system. Proposal 1 will help ensure that we have funding to invest in both of those. That $300 million equates to, if you were just looking at the K-12 budget, about $200 million per student. Now, we don't know that the money will be appropriated that way. It could $200 per pupil, sorry. Sorry, no, $200 per student. I got to make sure I'm reading the right line here. $200 per student. There's no guarantee that that's the way the money will flow. There are a lot of different things that the legislature could do in terms of how they appropriate the money. But the bottom line is if you have $300 million more available to appropriate, it makes a big difference in terms of the choices that are made. Conversely, if we were to adopt something like the Bolger plan, or one that says we're not going to increase any taxes, we're just going to shift and we're going to dedicate all of the taxes that are collected at the pump for roads, and we're not going to replace the revenue that's lost, that loss in the school aid fund equates to about $800 per pupil. So if we think education is important, and that if we believe that the prosperity of our state is dependent not only on our physical infrastructure and our ability to attract and retain employers, and we already know how important the agricultural industry is to our state, if we don't have a trained and highly educated workforce, we are not going to be a place that can compete in the 21st century. So this is an opportunity to secure the funding for the long haul. So if you think about it, there's a safety component, a stability component, the resources necessary to help invest in our both human and physical infrastructure, and then the renewal component is the last point, that the investment in transportation infrastructure will help spur economic development, creating healthy, vibrant communities that attract more students to our local schools. So at the end of the day, it's not hard for me as a superintendent and for my board, and Diane's here, we've already passed a resolution in support of Proposal 1, to point out the positive reasons to support Proposal 1. Now, if you're inclined to find some reason in the Christmas tree to vote no, it's not hard, because you only have to find one if that's your inclination. But I've not seen a Plan B. I'm terrified of what a Plan B looks like with no additional revenue. And so in an environment where we have to look at what options are in front of us, it seems to me that this is one that will help ensure that Michigan can continue down the road to a prosperous future, and that if it's not supported, that we're going to have some very difficult decisions to make. And we've already lived through some pretty painful times for public education. $470 per pupil less a few years ago, that had a long tail in terms of its impact on public education, increased class sizes, reduced programs, more and more districts struggling with going into deficit. These are things that we can hopefully address by having a targeted, sustained source of funding for schools, separate from the road funding. I want the gas tax to go to our roads because I think that's an appropriate way to do it. This cleans up what's a convoluted system and makes the lines of how the money is spent much cleaner. So with that, thank you for the opportunity to talk about the proposal.
So we are going to go into a question and answer session. How about if we take maybe a 5-minute break or 10-minute break at the most? We're going to distribute cards. Please, if you do have a question, fill out the card, give them to me, and then we will direct these questions to our panel. Here's the first question, and maybe this is probably going to be for Roy. How does this impact those people who are pro-hybrid electric, non-petroleum-based car owner drivers?
It's my understanding if you have a pure 100% electric car, you pay $75 a year additional registration fee. And if you had a hybrid, it's $25 a year. Is that your recollection, Adam?
Actually, I think my understanding is that it's both 25, but we'll have to, I guess we can verify that if we're seeing a discrepancy.
Yeah, I had heard something like it was more 75 if you had like a 100% electric vehicle. But there will be an additional fee. You know, is it a large amount? No, but it's like it's a step in that right direction.
That's right.
Okay.
So-
Adam?
I would say the key thing to think about too is that it is going to be an additional fee, but when we're talking about, you know, one of the things that we talk about as Democrats in the State House is fairness. And when you're talking about a vehicle that's going down the road that may be pretty fuel efficient, but maybe not as fuel efficient, you know, they're paying to that road repair via gas tax, and you're paying less as a result of that. And so if we're talking about fairness, that's part of it too. I don't want to discourage any use of additional technology to improve fuel efficiency, but I don't want somebody to get exempted just because they're choosing one type of technology. I don't think that's fair either. So.
Okay, all right. That probably leads in to this next question. Advertising for Proposal 1 states, low and middle income taxpayers will get tax relief. Please comment on how retirees, most of whom don't have earned income, will get tax relief. Recent studies show Michigan is the 4th oldest state, most Michigan bankruptcies are those 65 and older, I assume, 65 plus.
That's right.
So the issue is for retirees who are on fixed incomes and they're not eligible for the earned income tax.
That's right. So the earned income tax is obviously the main tax relief component to this. I would say that outside of that, let's be honest. The earned income tax, although it's a great program, does not affect all middle-class families. Middle class is effectively defined by the Pew Research, Charitable Pew Research Trust of an household income of $30,000 to $92,000. That's a big range, and obviously the EITC doesn't affect all of those families. That being the case, the thing I didn't put in the presentation, but I always ask people, you can either pay it in damage to your cars, or you can pay it in additional preventative maintenance on the roads. We're gonna end up paying for it somehow. And aluminum wheels and tires are about $800 for one of them. And so I realize that there is not a tax relief component for everybody in this. And if we had our way, if a number of us were able to get everything we wanted, you probably would see those things in the proposal. But it was a compromise. It's a legislative compromise. We thought that we could get this, and this would be a significant step in the improvement. And other people agreed with us, and that's how we ended up with where we're at. But I always ask people, nobody is right now driving down the road not being impacted. So you can either pay for it in car repair, or you can pay for it in additional taxation.
Thank you. Maybe this might be for Roy, or you guys can decide. Warranty protections, competitive bidding, performance-based systems. Definition of each, and do any of them lead to the loss of prevailing wages, loss of some kind of union representation, or introduce right-to-work conditions? Who wants to take that?
Okay.
Take on it.
The first part, I'll go with the warranty and, what was it, first two things, warranty and?
Warranty protections, competitive bidding,
Competitive bidding.
performance-based systems. So is this going to have an impact on labor?
Right. Well, yeah, competitive bidding is one of the components of this. If projects are over a certain size, then the township can require that the work is competitively bid out. For the most part, at Washtenaw County, we competitively bid our work. Or if a township wants to do the work themselves rather than work through the road commission, we're not opposed to that. I know some road commissions, if they contract with the townships, they only do the work themselves. They don't competitively bid it, but we do at Washtenaw County. But it makes it sort of unified statewide that if it's over a certain dollar threshold, I think it's $50,000, you competitively bid that. And so the township, this contracting that work will have, they can either go with that contractor, low bid, or the road commission, so they feel, the best price for it. As far as warranties, the same thing. I believe it's a contract over $1 million, there'll be warranties, so contractors are going to guarantee their work. And when I say that, people always say, well, what's that really mean? Last summer, we did, some long-term fixes on Ann Arbor Saline and Carpenter Road in this county. Carpenter Road was a full reconstruct. The pavement out there was about 40 years old, so we tore it all out and put concrete pavement in. So that's a pavement that's going to last, 30 years. It's not a short-term fix. So that one, you're going to put a warranty out there for, X number of years. It's going to be a longer-term warranty. Versus on a lot of the roads, what we're doing is what we call a mill and fill. We're going to mill off 2 inches and put back 2 inches. That's a 3 to 5 year fix. So I can't put a warranty out there on that and say, guarantee that work for 10 years because it's not a 10-year fix. So that's where it depends on the type of fix you're doing. And a lot of times those roads, what we call a mill and fill, the MDOT did that last year in I-94, on the south side of Ann Arbor. The milled off, they put back, it's like, wow, this looks like a brand new road. Well, it's really not a brand new road because you got pavement underneath there that's about 50 years old, the concrete pavement, and really you need to do what they did on I-96 was tear it all out, shut the whole thing down and tear it out and build it up. But what we continue to do is buy some time and do it, what they call the mill and fill. So those warranties, yeah, they'll be on projects, but it depends on the type of work. Is it a long-term repair or is it short-term? So I'll let Adam deal with the other components
the
of that
labor
question.
issue? Yeah.
Sure. The other thing I would just like to add, you mentioned a portion of I-94 south of Ann Arbor. I'll mention a portion of I-94 east of that. Who here has been headed westbound on I-94 coming from the airport to Ann Arbor City. You can talk about that mill and fill right there, because there's a very good stretch of road for about a mile where it's clear that there's about a 2-inch gap in certain areas. They look like little puddles around the middle of the expressway. And it's because that mill and fill that popped off. If we could do the reconstruction, we had the funding to do those types of things, then these other practices would be, less favorable. To answer your question, there is no right to work component to this. There's no effect on prevailing wage. Right to work was passed into law under the December 2012 legislative session, and there's no effect on labor or right to work laws, prevailing wage with this. Those are completely independent.
Okay, thank you. Shoot, I have one here for farms. I'm trying to fiddle around with these. Hold on here just a second. Let me find this. What did I do with it? I think the question was, if I could find it, do farmers, and this would probably be a good one for Matt, do farmers pay the same tax, gas tax, as other people do? Let me find the exact question here.
For on-the-road fuel, yes. For off-the-road fuel,
here it is.
no. So, what's off-the-road fuel? That's the kind of fuel that's dyed diesel, which goes into most tractors. Since those are primarily used in fields, they're not primarily used on roads. Farmers do not pay fuel taxes on dyed diesel. For non-dyed diesel fuels, yes, farmers pay the same taxes as anybody else.
Okay. A couple questions here on vehicle registration. One is, will vehicle registration fees go up? The other is regarding vehicle registration. Representative Zemke said no further fee discounts past 4 years depreciation. Lowest fee is something like $111. I currently pay about $71 on my 10-year-old car. My sister pays $61 on her 14-year-old car. What would we have to pay if Proposal 1 passes?
So that depreciation component is only on new cars. So if you buy a new car, when I use that example, by the way, the $155 down to $111, that was on a vehicle that cost $30,000. So just purely an example to say, here's what you're paying when you buy it new in a registration cost. Here's what it's going to be 4 years later if you start with a $30,000 vehicle price. If you're talking about used vehicles, that's not what we're talking about here. This depreciation, or removing this depreciation, doesn't have any effect on used vehicles. So you're not going to get affected by that. Basically, that's what we're talking about. So I don't know what I believe basically if you're paying $71 and it's been basically $71 for the last several years, it's essentially stagnant on a used vehicle. You're going to stay the same. So.
This is an interesting question that I've heard for many, many years. Why doesn't Michigan lower tax weight limits? Truck weight limits.
So I'll take a stab at this one here. There's a lot of reasons, and I have not actually found one solid answer that tells me exactly why we set the truck weight limits at where we did. But I've heard a lot of answers, and I kind of draw my own conclusion from that. So that's what I'll give you. So we have 163,000 pound weight limits in our state, and that is higher than everywhere else in the country. And a lot of states have 80,000 pounds, a little bit more than that. But I've heard the argument that we don't have 80,000 pounds because we'd have pretty close to double the number of trucks on the road. And there's some logic to that. So I think that could be potentially right. I think the real reason is basically when this weight limit was set, there was a decision made by the folks setting it, the legislators, to say, we're going to go with a weight limit where we're not going to dramatically increase the amount of trucks on the road, given the fact that we're such a manufacturing intense state. When you look at how much manufacturing product originates from Michigan, that passes through. A lot passes through too, because we're a major port coming in Detroit from Windsor. But there's a lot that originates here because we produce a lot. We have for a long time. That's a staple of our economy. And I think that probably a calculation was done at that time when they set these weight limits to say, we want to balance how many trucks are on the road with how much weight per vehicle, from a safety standpoint, from an economic standpoint. And that's probably the way they came up with the weight calculation that they did. And so that's I think.
Roy, did you want to, I know that issue
Yeah, I
always
mean,
came from
I've
the
sort of
road
heard the
commission
same
too.
story. I mean, obviously, the automobile lobby is very strong in Lansing, and it's strong today, and it was even stronger back then. And also the logging industry, so those are the two components that really, when the limits were set nationwide, Michigan decided to stick with a higher weight limit, i.e. manufacturing automobiles and the steel manufacturing, like Adam said, we do produce a lot of product, and shipping steel from here to there and shipping product in the logging industry were two of the main reasons we end up going with a higher weight limit. So if not, you end up with twice as many trucks as steel haulers in the logging industry. So there's strong lobbies, and that's have stayed in place. And I mean, a little story here. York Township about 15 years ago said, we're going to prohibit trucks in our township because we want to try to save our roads. Well, that sounded good back then, but we said, by doing that, you're going to limit federal funds onto all your roads, the primary road system. Now York Township probably has some of the worst roads in the county because we haven't been able to take care of them. And here in Michigan, you got freezing and thawing, and the roads deteriorate without the trucks. So there hasn't really been any trucks in York Township in about 15 years, but drive some of the roads in York Township, and they're in pretty bad shape. So it's a combination of weather and loadings that, deteriorate the roads here in Michigan.
And if I could add, he didn't mention the agricultural lobby, but the agricultural lobby also opposes touching weight limits. We grow more commodities in Michigan than what we consume. Most of the product that, from an agricultural standpoint, that we raise in Michigan goes out of state. Touching weight limits would have a negative impact on the agricultural industry, so, we would also oppose touching that, and that's why, one of the reasons why we like Proposal 1, because we see Proposal 1 as taking the discussion off of weight limit.
I'll add one thing too. You saw that slide that we had up there on commercial vehicle registrations and the increase in that. The part of that reason is to offset that we recognize that commercial vehicles weigh more, and as an engineering equation, they exponentially degrade roads at a higher rate. That's just simple, well, not simple math. That's actually pretty complicated math. But that being the case, there's an effort to establish, a fair payment essentially in compensation for that additional degradation, and that's where the commercial vehicle registration increases come into play.
Okay. Now, I was digging through here to find a question on education that I could ask direct to Scott. School dedicated funds, $300 million will go to schools, K-12, junior colleges, and community colleges and career tech. What other forms of funding comes to schools? Can the legislature touch the $300 million?
Well, they get to appropriate, right? So it can't be shifted to higher ed, but that doesn't mean that they can't put more on to the school aid fund. So there have been things that in the past were funded out of the general fund that now are funded out of school aid fund. And so the shifts can still happen. This doesn't stop that, except for the one big shift to moving school aid fund to higher education. So there's still an accountability mechanism with our elected officials to watch the way in which they do the appropriation. But again, more money in the school aid fund generally means better news for our K-12 schools than less money in the school aid fund.
And I would add that you're adding more money in that are constitutionally protected dollars.
Right.
And that's the key component. I sit on the school aid budget, and that's often confused with the school aid fund. They're actually different. School aid fund is what we're talking about here. That's the revenue stream in. That's constitutionally protected. School aid budget is our K through 12 budget that we produce annually in the state, so which has different streams of revenue. But like Scott said, the logical argument is if you can have more protected dollars that have to be appropriated for K through 12 and community colleges, the outcome for those entities is probably going to be higher.
Okay, thank you. Does this proposal address mass transit?
Yes. In that $1.3 billion, there is a $100 million increase for mass transit. So,
That's all? Oh, sorry. It's my editorial comment.
yes.
Okay, I hope I understand this question. How are transportation funding increases constitutionally protected if they aren't what we are voting on?
So it's a matter of the revenue streams. And that's where the tax structure changes come into play here. You know, we talked about those two pie charts where you have those two streams of revenue that are going into the transportation fund. Transportation fund is the constitutionally protected fund. What we're talking about is making sure that all of that revenue in those two pies basically go into the transportation fund, and then backfilling the schools and local government portion that we're taken away from to dedicate into the transportation fund. And that's part of the constitutional proposal. Part of the reason this has to be voted on by the people is because it is a constitutional change. And otherwise, I mean, the legislature could not physically do what we're talking about. It would require a vote of the people. So that's why. So, yeah.
Several questions here on, is this sales tax increase enough to fix the roads? And does Proposal 1 yield enough money specifically for road repairs to solve the bad roads? Obviously, the transportation fund goes to more than just road repair.
That's
That's
true.
probably a Roy question, too.
Yeah. I would argue that this, at a minimum, gets us a significant step in the right direction. There have been a lot of numbers that I've heard in Lansing since I first arrived a little over 2 years ago about what it costs to, what we need to repair roads. In fact, my predecessor in the House put together a very significant report that actually prior to my even taking office, he reviewed with me. It was
And
a lot
that
of
also said exactly what the Transportation Funding Task Force said when I was on in 2008,
There we go.
$1.3 billion, just
That's
to
right.
maintain.
And so ironically, all those numbers lined up.
$1.3 billion keeps coming up,
Yep.
and that's just to maintain.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so there have been numbers that have been higher. I've heard 2.5 billion. But the one that comes up most consistently is basically this one. So this is where we ended
So it
up.
gets us to maintaining, but not.
Yeah, this is additional
do you
to
have some
maintain.
thoughts?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I mean, and Adam covered it a little bit. You know, the first year, we're getting 1/3 it's in, and 2/3 is going to go down to pay down the debt because past administrations borrowed, you know, they'd build Michigan 1, build Michigan 2, and build Michigan 3, which they borrowed basically $2.4 billion, and the state's paying back about $200 million a year. This will, you know, year 1, we're getting $400 million, which Washtenaw County will get about $4 million. Year 2 will be $8 million, in year 3, $12 million, and that will continue on into the future. So, yeah, it's in the right direction, and it gives us time to ramp up infrastructure, because what has happened in this state is a lot of the contractors have either gone bankrupt, left the state, and same with the employees. So you got to sort of rebuild that industry, and it just doesn't turn, it's not like switch a light switch. It takes some time to get those people, and contractors have not been investing in new equipment, because you're going to invest in new equipment and all that stuff, like new trucks and all this heavy equipment, it's very expensive. You want to make sure you're going to be looking down the road, and there's going to be new projects down the road. So it's going to take a while to ramp up. But no, I think this, like I said, this is the first time really in 50 years, they're finally putting money into long-term funding for the roads. And the good news is on this wholesale implementation, there's a floor on it, because Kentucky did the same thing. Everyone is calling smart gas taxes based on a percentage of the price. And when the price was going up, you know, $3.50, $4 a gallon, you know, Kentucky and a lot of other states like, wow, this is great. Kentucky didn't put a floor on it. And last fall, when the bottom went out, they're looking at $1 billion hole because they don't have a floor. Now the revenue's, you know, in the hole. So the good thing on this, there is a floor, and it's like 42 cents per gallon is sort of the floor. So the good news is, I think, you know, it looks at short-term and long-term solution.
Okay, I've heard that any of the 10 laws that will go into effect if Proposal 1 passes could be repealed or changed at any time. Are we at risk of having a constitutional sales tax increase permanent, then losing the extras that benefit education, et cetera? So in other words, I guess the income tax credit, all the other things that are kind of tie barred to this.
Right. So either somebody here has been talking with somebody that I had coffee with on Saturday, or they're still in the room. This same question was asked to me on Saturday.
Okay.
And I would say the answer to this is I don't believe that that's possible. I mean, when you're you have a series of statutory bills that are tie-barred to a constitutional amendment. When you tie-bar a piece of legislation to another piece of legislation, that means that legally you have to have both in law in order for the proposal to work. So my answer to this would be I don't think that that's accurate. I don't think that you could tie-bar a series of 10 other bills to a constitutional amendment and then repeal one of those other bills, and then the whole thing is allowed to stay. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Tell those guys that had that thing on Monday, real conservative Republican, because they said.
Well, I can tell you that I was asked to participate in that thing on Monday.
They had an empty chair.
Yeah, well, that's,
Easy with it for you.
you can remind them that we're here to talk about Proposal 1, not talk about whatever ideas they've concocted to fund the roads.
Pretty partisan.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
What type of skill training for road construction can we expect for jobs?
I don't really know much about road construction, so.
Yeah, I mean, there is a need, I mean, for obviously truck drivers and equipment operators, and the good news is, I mean, those are generally good-paying jobs, and what you're seeing is, I mean, on the whole school funding, it's about educating, because a lot of our vocational programs have been reduced and cut. We're trying to hire mechanics, we're trying to hire truck drivers, and then you can't find them, because vocational, we've been focused on, you know, a lot of university and college grads, but you need those vocational people to be operators of those dozers, those graders, and being the work labor out there. So I think those are things that, and like I said, a lot of those skilled trades have left the state because there hasn't been the steady income. But I think you'll see them coming back, and you'll see, you know, people in high school that find out, you know, wow, that is a good job and it's a steady job, because right now it's not so steady. Even though the pay is decent, it's like, can I really live on working 6 months and being laid off, you know, 6 months? So I think you're going to see people, you know, an operators union, you know, statewide, which basically are the people that run the dozers, the graders, and same with the Teamsters and the truck drivers and stuff like that. There's going to be an uptick on those type of jobs. I think one number I saw was about 14,000 new jobs this would generate, and generally those are higher paying jobs, and they wouldn't go to vocational schools or tech schools to
Right.
get that training.
Right. Okay. Where does today's gas tax go, number one, and why would we hide the gas tax in a wholesale tax? So what's it, the whole change to the wholesale tax?
So the best way to think about this is, you know, kind of take a look back at those slides. You've got a fixed gas tax, and you've got a sales tax at the pump on a percentage basis. What we're talking about is essentially eliminating that and putting in a new fuel tax that encompasses a wholesale tax on a percentage basis. So the goal is to eliminate a flat tax structure, or a stream of revenue that is significantly dependent upon a flat tax structure, and to put that in on a percentage basis to index it to inflation further upstream. I don't think it's a matter of hiding it, it's just a matter of changing the tax structure.
Right, yeah, I remember that, the transportation. funding
And I guess
task
real quick,
force, yeah.
the one side I had was the numbers, the flip side was, you know, the gas tax, that's how it is today, 19 cents per gallon, the 6% sales
There
tax.
you go.
This is gonna be the 14.9% wholesale tax. We'd eliminate the 19 cent and we eliminate the sales tax, so that's how it ends up being the 42 cents, which creates a steady 1.2 additional money for roads with that wholesale tax. So
Okay. We have a number of questions that what if, well, number one, how would you describe the drawbacks of Proposal 1? And what is the biggest flaw that will sway people against it? And then these are all kind of the same thought. This is projected to fail. What is the plan to promote passage in the short time left to convince voters? And is there a plan B if Proposal 1 fails? If so, what is it? So these are all kind of on the same crepe-hanging issue, but I think that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, so I'll take a first stab at this.
Yeah.
So I think Scott said earlier that there really is no plan B. And I think that's pretty accurate. You know, I've been in Lansing for a little over 2 years. This issue has been pretty seriously debated ever since the current governor came into office, probably quite frankly before then. But there wasn't able to be a solution. This was the only solution, in fact, that was able to get through both chambers in the last 4 years. And, there have been multiple other proposals vetted. You talk about this gas tax change that passed the Senate barely, and that couldn't make it through the House. Talk about the Bolger plan that Scott referred to, which is essentially all of the shifting of funds, but no replacement. And that couldn't make it through the Senate. And it would have gone through the House actually, I don't even know if it could make it through the House, quite frankly. But it would have gone through on a straight party line vote, that's for certain.
How does Bolger feel about the Bolger plan now?
Bolger actually has endorsed Proposal 1. So, the other thing I'll tell you, is that this plan is not a partisan plan. 95% of Democratic legislators between two chambers voted for it. 70% of Republicans. This is pretty bipartisan, and I wouldn't say that it's projected to fail. It's going to be real close. I can tell you that. That's one thing I am willing to bet on, and that's why it's real important that this is like my 9th forum with this presentation. It's gotten, I think, increasingly confusing each time. But it's real important that we go out and talk to people about this, because there's flat out lies out there that special interests have hijacked this. There are no special interests here. Some people, unless you consider kids, school children, special interests, then don't believe any of that. And it's a matter of educating people. I find that you can walk into a room with a lot of people who are very upset and confused about this. In fact, I've gotten emails from people that have said, literally, I'm voting against Proposal 1 because I think you're just going to take the money, it's not going to be dedicated, and I want all my money from my gas taxes to go to roads. I call them back and I say, that's exactly what Proposal 1 does. You should vote yes. It's confusing. It's important that we go out and talk with people, that we tell people about all the things that it does. And ask them to make up their mind. Tell them to read the news articles. Some news articles are not very good. There's actually some really good detailed media editorials about this. The Free Press and the Detroit News have both come out in support of it, and they've outlined exactly what the bills do and exactly what happens. And it's important that we all talk about it, because if we don't, then it could fail, absolutely. But I think if you were to do an exit survey and you ask people what they wanted, they'd probably tell you they want their money dedicated to road repair, and they're willing to pay for it, which is exactly what Proposal 1 does.
Also, I just want to make a comment. Representative Driscoll had to leave, but she has pointed out that we have a brochure from the League of Women Voters that is an objective analysis of this proposal, so please feel free to take one. So we do have that. And also, I believe there's another forum coming up. I don't know, Roy or Scott, if you want to address that, another forum.
Yeah, April 23rd at Washtenaw ISD. Roy will be featured as a key speaker. And I'll be on the docket, as will
Kurt Steidel, Director of MDOT, will also be there. So he'll share his insight as far as MDOT, how's it impact MDOT? Because obviously MDOT's been at this a long time, trying to, because they're dependent, they have no other way of raising revenue either. They're sort of like road commissions. They depend on the state legislature to fund that. And actually the last, 4 years, without aid from other general fund, we'd been giving back nearly $1 billion in federal aid. They don't even have enough money to match the federal aid. So each year they had to put about $130 million into continue matching federal aid. I mean, that's how desperate it's gotten, because they don't even have enough revenue coming in to match the federal aid.
The key here is voter turnout, Pam, and to me, if I have a worry, it's getting people out on Cinco de Mayo to vote. People who are motivated, no voters will show up. We need to get the people who understand that this impacts our future to show up at the polls, and that's really going to be the key in terms of the final outcome.
And I would not give too much credibility to any of the polling data that's been out there. When the firms that are doing polling on Prop 1, they're talking to likely voters in November elections. This is not a November election. It's a May election. And they don't really know who a likely voter is in a May election, because we haven't had a statewide May election going way back to prior to the Milliken years. So it's been a long time. I don't think these polling firms know who is going to show up to vote. So I don't believe the data.
Well, I can tell you about that. I get a brochure in the mail almost every day.
Okay, they come to these, they
Yeah.
come out late in the evenings, they will come to a day presentation. Are you all
Yeah.
going to the senior citizens to talk to them about this, or they?
Yeah, apparently the League of Women Voters has made a presentation at the retirement center. Representative Driscoll was sharing that with me. There was a presentation that they had made, I don't know, was it retirement center? Is it Chelsea Retirement Center? Okay. Okay, yeah.
And,
Are you also trying to get the students that are 18 years old?
Yeah. I know I've spoken with some groups at the University of Michigan and talked with them about the importance of showing up to vote on May 5th and making sure that they're registered. So that, they can register, as long as they're registered anywhere in the state of Michigan, they can vote on this, being this a state.
Well, I think we're just, yeah, yes, sir.
First question's a little rhetorical, and fresh in my mind is the meeting that GOP had the other night. It's not really a meeting. Why is there no one here to speak against the proposal? But my real question is for Roy, I think. When the truck weight limit was dramatically increased, there was no corresponding increase in engineering specs so that the roads could handle those weights. When you're given a lot of money, if this passes, will you continue to use it to build roads and maintain roads just the way you've been doing it? Or will you upgrade your maintenance and building practices to build better roads? I've been in the county for 50 years, and I'm kind of frustrated that after a road is built, 3 years go by and it starts to fail. And I'm not talking about milling, I'm talking about a new road.
Well, I guess a couple things. The weight limits were always higher in this state. It wasn't like they allowed them. It's when the federal put limits that the state allowed to keep them. It wasn't like all of a sudden Michigan went to higher standards. They had always had higher standards for a long period of time. It wasn't until nationwide they put a cap that Michigan exempted themselves from that. Just to clarify that. Yeah, we will be looking to rebuild and reconstruct roads rather than putting temporary mill and fill or chip seals on roads and looking at long-term. You also got to look at, it's really, in Washtenaw County, those large trucks, for the most part, are going to be at I-94, US 23, and the freeways. We see them on our roads, the gravel trains, and we rebuild those haul routes for trucks, like we just did, like Ann Arbor Saline, and also they also participate in rebuilding those for longer-term fixes. So yeah, we're going to do it on every road. This is not enough money to rebuild every road to what we call an all-season or a truck route, but you don't need every road to an all-season or a truck route, because you got to look at where are those large trucks going. And for the most part, in Washtenaw County, you have some manufacturing that's generally going to be closer to the freeway system. The gravel pits, are out, and that's why we work with those gravel haulers to have what we call haul routes, so they use certain roads to get in and out of their pits to the freeways. And
How about maybe you can follow up with Roy afterwards about the truck weight. But I just want to thank you all very much for coming. I think Bill has an announcement to make, and then we will.
Real quick,
Yeah.
the gentleman who's talking here, absolutely right about the polls. Do not believe the polls because of the fact that this is going to be a tiny turnout election. You cannot predict what's going to happen in a tiny turnout election. Now, why am I standing up here? Because I am the precinct organizing committee co-chair of the Washtenaw County Democratic Party. We are already out supporting Prop 1, knocking on doors, making phone calls. If there is anybody who has any time at all to help us, whether it's calling, walking, just talking to your neighbors, we can give you materials, we can give you support, we can give you names of people near where you live to do that. This is what's going to be critical, is getting out the vote. Now, we know that Tea Partiers are going to come out. We know that there are a lot of Democrats that are going to come out. But the question is, on the day, who goes out? And that's what's going to decide this. So, you can see me. There's a sign-up sheet for anybody who wants to do this work to help us. So please either see me or sign up over there. Thank you.
And I want to thank our panel for taking the time and the great information. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Thank you all very much.